Hi, I'm John Knight Lundwall. Welcome to Myth in the Bible. This is our first textual presentation. And instead of starting in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, I thought I would start with this narrative, the Ascent of Elijah in 2 Kings chapters 1 and 2. I'm starting here because this narrative sort of has everything we're going to encounter in other biblical narratives as we proceed. It's got literary parallelisms, puns, poetry, oracles. It intersects with pagan cosmology and religion, and it has issues that we don't know what to do with, right? So some mysterious issues, and so as a result, it's sort of a great template to start and to show how wonderful and how difficult it can be to look at some of these texts. When I do these textual presentations, generally I'm going to pick some verses or a chapter out of the Bible and analyze it, and that will come in 3 YouTube presentations. The first will be a literary analysis where we're just going to go over the text, and that's what we're going to do here tonight. The second will be a mythological analysis as we analyze the oral, cosmological, ritual background, if we can surmise it, from the text, from the biblical tradition, or from the pagan tradition surrounding the Israelites. And then the third presentation will, simply be answering the question, now what? Now that we've deconstructed the biblical text and looked at the myth and religious tradition surrounding it, now how do we interpret it? Can we interpret it? So that's what we're doing tonight. Remember, like, subscribe, share, comment. Let's begin. All right, in order to really understand and fully enjoy this pericope, which is a word which means a section of a story or a story, of Elijah ascending into heaven, which is detailed in 2 Kings chapter 2, you really have to begin in 2 Kings chapter 1. The biblical scribes are sometimes, they're just literary geniuses. They're an ancient form of Shakespeare. And what they do is they set up a scenario against which to compare Elijah, and that is the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. It was King Ahab. He has died, and his son Ahaziah is now the king. And so they prepare this frame story against which to compare the ascent of Elijah. And it turns out the frame story is chapter 1, the ascent of Elijah is chapter 2, and they are mirror images of each other. And so to read the one, you should read the other, because they're really reflecting on the situation between the two. So let's begin. All right, verse 1 of chapter 1, 2 Kings. I'm again reading from the Revised Standard Version translation, the RSV. You can use any translation you want. I will switch between translations as I go along in these different presentations. Now Ahaziah fell through the lattice in his upper chamber in Samaria and lay sick. So he sent messengers telling them, "Go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, whether I shall recover from this sickness." All right, this is the opening scene. So imagine you're sitting in a theater, the curtain opens, and for the first time, you're going to see the new king of Israel. His name's Ahaziah. He's, again, the son of Ahab and Jezebel. Both of them are treated by biblical scribes as, bad people. They worshiped the pagan gods. They kept the high places, which were the sanctuaries for the pagan gods. Jezebel actually lays a plan to murder an innocent man to obtain his vineyard, for which she is remembered. And so, they're the bad guys according to the biblical scribes. Well, his son Ahaziah, this is his first moment on the stage, and the first thing he does is falls through a hole in the floor. and basically falls to his death. So enter stage left, fall through the hole, you're done. It's meant to be comedic. All right. So presumably he's in a high chamber in his palace, which is presumably the throne room. And so from the throne room, he falls through an opening in some lattice work and, falls to the lower courtyard, and his body is broken. I was once told that the definition of tragedy was when a man walks down the street and breaks his toe on an open manhole. And the definition of comedy is when a man walks down the street, falls down an open manhole, and dies. Right? Comedy is the absurdity of the excess of tragedy. And so this is what we get. Literally, Ahaziah walks on stage and falls down an open manhole. It's important to note that Ahaziah's name means God shall grab or hold or take hold, or God shall take. The scribes who write this narrative actually use his name as a pun in the next chapter. So we will look at that. So he's lying in his bed broken, and he sends messengers to go inquire of Beelzebub. So Baal is the god of the Canaanites. He's the head god. He's a storm god over rain and weather. But, that makes him a cosmocrator over the creation. Yeah, he's a god of justice. But he's king of the gods. And the Jewish scribes have added a modifier, Zebub, which basically means flies. So Beelzebub means Lord of the Flies. Look, scholars have looked at that and said, yeah, the northern kingdom Israelites and the Canaanites probably wouldn't be worshiping a Lord of the Flies, and so they have suggested the original name was Baal-zebul, meaning Prince of the Gods, but the Hebrew scribes changed the L to a B to change it to Lord of the Flies. It's a way to poke a finger in the eye of the man. In any case, Beelzebub, shows up in the New Testament as a demon in hell serving Satan, and sometimes equated with the Christian devil or Satan. But here's the origin of the word Beelzebub: Baal, Lord God, Zebub of the Flies. In any case, Ahaziah sends his messengers to get an oracle. So this is what is very common in the ancient world. Kings and many people would go to oracular sites, temples, and precincts where there was an oracle who spoke from the other side, who had special knowledge, and who could foretell the future or pronounce a blessing or pronounce a curse. And very often the prophets in the Bible deliver oracles. Their job is that of one who is a soothsayer of oracles. And so there they go, off to seek an oracle from the god Beelzebub. Well, while this is happening, God speaks to Elijah, the prophet of the northern kingdom of Israel, and one of, probably the most famous prophet of that time period. He's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. He has special powers, and he roams the countryside like a Jedi Knight using the Force. So we read, "But the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, 'Arise, go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria, and say to them, Is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Now therefore, thus saith the Lord, you shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone, but you shall surely die.' So Elijah went." So basically, the voice of the Lord tells Elijah, intercept the messengers of Ahaziah, and ask them, why are you going to seek an oracle from Beelzebub? There is a God in Israel, Yahweh, And that is the God of the universe. That is who you should be seeking an oracle from. In fact, I'm going to give you the oracle of Yahweh, which is this line. You shall not come down from the bed to which you have gone, but you shall surely die. That is the oracle Elijah delivers to the messengers of the king. The Hebrew of this oracle is a little strange, for to go down from the bed to which you have gone infers one has ascended up before they go down. The King James Version translates it this way. Now therefore, thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up, but shall surely die. And Elijah departed. Robert Alter, the famous Hebraist, and I love reading his translations, I'll quote from him often, translates it, from the bed you mounted, you shall not come down. So you don't really technically mount a bed. You mount a steed, a chariot, or a throne. You ascend to the place that you mount. And so the oracle is basically saying, you've ascended to your bed, and you will not come down from it until you die. You will not come down until you go down into the underworld, right? And so we're introduced within the first few verses with this really interesting literary technique that they are employing. Ahaziah starts in the throne room, presumably, the high place in the palace. He falls through a hole, and he falls down into his bed. High to low, falling down. Then, the oracle of Yahweh, he's told you will ascend to your bed, and you will not come down from it until you die. So we have this imagery of ascending and falling and descending, and this echoes throughout both these chapters. So they're using this to show that there's all kinds of reversals that are happening, and you really can't tell. History is unfathomable. You don't know how it's going to unfold. What seems up is often down, and what seems down is often up. This is the background to these puns. Well, the messengers returned to the king with the oracle of Yahweh. They never made it to the oracle of Beelzebub. And they report to him. And of course the king says, what kind of man was he who came to meet you and told you these things? They answered him, he wore a garment of haircloth with a girdle of leather about his loins. And the king said, it is Elijah the Tishbite. This is the only description of Elijah we get in the Old Testament. And he's basically a man with a haircloth. He's a hairy man wearing a leather belt. And he lives out in the wilderness. A few details about Elijah. His name means, my God is Yahweh. And, he has command over the element of fire. It's a motif that repeatedly shows up in his miracles. We'll talk about that shortly. But clearly, a man who's out in the wilderness, he lives in the hilltops, in the caves. He has command over the element of fire. He's hairy and, unkept. Basically, it doesn't mean he's a wild man. It means that he's not associated with the royal courts or the royal temples. He's an outsider. Clearly, the New Testament scribes compared John the Baptist directly with Elijah because John the Baptist had many of the same features. He was an outsider. He lived in the wilderness. He was a hairy man. And he literally brought down the pillar of fire, as in the Holy Spirit, when he baptized Jesus Christ. And so these characteristics of John the Baptist are echoes and probably borrowed from the Old Testament prophet Elijah, the Obi-Wan of the Tanakh. Well, now that Ahaziah knows who he is up against, he still wants his oracle from Beelzebub, and so he sends out a captain with 50 men. These are soldiers. And he orders them, go take care of Elijah. Verse 9, then the king sent to him a captain, sent to Elijah a captain of 50 men with his 50. He went up to Elijah, who was sitting on the top of a hill. So he's on, in the high places. and said to him, this is the captain, O man of God, the king says, come down. So once again, we get this image, this metaphor of up and down, up and down. Ahaziah falls from the high place down. He ascends to the low place and is promised he won't come down from it, his bed, until he dies. And now he sends military men to command Elijah to come down. And of course, Elijah is fated to go up, right, into heaven. And so, but Elijah answered the captain of 50, if I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50. Then fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50. So, you really don't want to go up against Elijah, no matter how many men you have. Well, this is, first off, an echo of a previous episode where Elijah faces off against like 850 priests of Baal during a great famine. And he tells the priests of Baal, look, you make a sacrifice, an animal sacrifice on your altar, and command or ask Baal to burn the sacrifice by himself, by his powers. And then I'll do the same. So they have this competition, and the priests of Baal build an altar, sacrifice an ox, and sure enough, it doesn't burst into flame. Nothing happens. Elijah builds an altar, sacrifices his sacrifice, douses the sacrifice and the altar with barrels of water, digs a trench around the altar, fills the trench with water, and then he prays to God, and a pillar of fire comes down and consumes all of it, including the priests of Baal. And so this is, so now that the pillar of fire is coming down, consuming the men of the king, this is an echo that this is the power that Elijah wields. Well, so, those men don't return. And so the king sends another company of 50 with a captain, and they, the exact same verbiage is used. They get consumed by a pillar of fire. Then the king sends a third company of 50. I mean, with all these pillars of fire falling out of the sky, you would think that, someone might say, maybe we should try a different approach. But there's an oral logic to this. Generally, in oral folklore and in fairy tale, you get repetitions of 3. And we find this frequently in Old Testament narrative. You get a scenario that is repeated 3 times. The first 2 times tend to be identical, and the last time someone has learned a lesson, and then there is a change. This is, part of the literary technique of the Hebrew scribes, but really it's descending from oral storytelling, where you tell a story in a way that is memorable. So it's filled with memorable features, including memorable characters, memorable events, memorable monsters, but also it's repetitive. It comes in patterns, parallelisms, and often in 3s. So this is a oral technique. And what this tells us is, despite the literary technique that the scribes are using, the story probably had a long tradition of oral transmission. And this survives in our text through this structure. So the king sends out 3 companies of 50. The last company of 50, the captain approaches Elijah, recognizing that the previous 2 companies were burned. He actually genuflects and begs for mercy, tells Elijah that he and his men are his servants. In other words, the captain treats Elijah as the king. And as a result, Elijah spares the captain and his men. So the men of the military learned the lesson that the true power in the land isn't the king of Israel, the man who sits on the throne, who's now in his bed. Rather, it's the wild man who sits on top of a hill, who's been commanded to come down, but has delivered an oracle saying, actually, it's your king that will come down. So anyway, this third group of 50 is spared. Elijah then goes to Ahaziah, personally delivers the oracle, and Ahaziah dies. He is then succeeded by his brother Jehoram. His brother succeeds to the throne, and this really is the end of chapter 1. Then, so that's the frame story. We get a peek into the machinations of the kingdom and the power of the state, ruled by Ahaziah. His name means God shall take. His first act on the stage is to fall down a hole. And it should be noted, his mother, Jezebel, dies by being thrown out a window of the high palace. And so this family line is fated to fall from the throne room to their deaths. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. We are immediately told that the Lord is about to take Elijah. And of course, Ahaziah's name means God shall take. So here's the pun. The king of Israel, whose name means God shall take, falls from his throne to his bed and to his death, because he doesn't follow the God of Israel, whereas Elijah will be taken by the God of Israel. So this first verse is a pun on the first 2 verses of the previous chapter. Elijah has an acolyte, a follower in training, who will be his Padawan, Elisha. And so they're on their way from Gilgal, and the place names actually are important in this story. The Hebrew scribes have attended to every detail. Verse 2, and Elijah said to Elisha, tarry here, I pray you, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. Well, Gilgal is by the river Jordan in a valley. And Bethel is a high place. It's the sacred precinct of the northern kingdom of Israel, where they had a temple to their gods. Bethel was a very holy place. It was Israel's version of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the southern kingdom. Bethel is the location where Jacob wrestles with an angel all night long and then sees the face of God. And then he sets up a pillar, an altar, and is renamed Israel. So Bethel is the place where Israel is founded through an encounter with the divine, and ever since then it has become a holy precinct. Now the thing with Bethel is it's a high place. It's high up in the mountains. Gilgal is a low place down by the river. And we have this phrase, so they went down to Bethel, meaning topographically they're going down to Bethel, but they're not. They're actually climbing up to Bethel. And so once again, we get this up-down reversal, which is echoing throughout both these chapters, that Elijah and Elisha are literally go up to Bethel, but because it is the sacred precinct of the pagan gods, it's actually going down to Bethel. Well, they go to Bethel and they encounter a group of people called the Ben Navi, sons of the prophets. And this group in the Old Testament is always associated with Elijah and Elisha. So it appears to be a priesthood guild. So every oracle site had priests, and then the priests had priests in training. Well, the Ben Navi, the sons of the prophets, according to most of our commentaries, are these, prophets in training. They're not the oracles or prophets. They're the acolytes. In fact, again, Robert Alter translates Ben Navi as acolytes. In any case, these are the sons of the prophets of the holy precinct at Bethel, the pagan gods, not the gods of Yahweh. But they still deliver a correct they still understand the correct order of things, because they say, do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you? So they know Elijah is going to be taken from the earth. So they have this foresight. And of course they're speaking to Elisha, the acolyte of Elijah. And he says, yes, I know it. Hold your peace. Well, they go to Bethel, encounter these sons of the prophets, and then the Lord tells Elijah, go to Jericho. So they go to Jericho, where they meet other Ben Navi, other sons of the prophets. The exact same thing happens. They say, do you know that today the Lord will take away your master from over you? It's like an oracle. And Elisha says yes. And then the Lord tells Elijah to go to the river Jordan, where another group of Ben Navi, the sons of the prophets, appear to witness the ascent of Elijah. So what we have here then is a mirror image of the three companies of 50 that Ahaziah sends out in order to get rid of Elijah, is now matched by the three groups of the sons of the prophets. It's interesting and probably should be noted that every place that Elijah and Elisha go does bear some importance. Gilgal is where they start. They ascend to Bethel, which is, let me point this out on the map, is up here in the high places, Gilgal down by the river. Then they go down to Jericho, and then they go to the Jordan River to cross it. Well, Gilgal just so happens to be the place from which Moses and the Israelites embark after their exodus from Egypt. This is where they enter the Jordan Valley. So Gilgal is the starting point of the journey of Israel in the Mosaic times. Then they go to Bethel, which is a high place, and then they go to Jericho. And it just so happens that topographically, Jericho is the lowest inhabited city on the planet. It's, 700-800 feet below sea level. And by the way, Jericho is also the first city that the early Israelites conquer when they take over Canaan, right? This is where Joshua, destroys the city walls of Jericho. And then they cross over to the Jordan. And so just these places sort of represent the entire history of Israel. And Elijah, this is the day Elijah is being taken from the earth. And so he is going from place to place that signify the entire history of Israel. Well, they make it to the Jordan River, and as I said, this third group of the sons of the prophet appear to apparently witness the ascent of Elijah. This is the first time, however, we're told that the number of the sons of the prophets is 50. And we just assume that this is just a parallel of the 50 soldiers that were sent out 3 times by King Ahaziah. And so we just assume that it's a parallel. In our next presentation, I will show that actually this is punning on something else entirely, and it's very interesting. So we get 50 men of the sons of the prophets also went and stood at some distance from them. And as they both were standing by the Jordan, then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, till the two of them could go over on dry ground. Well, clearly this is an allusion to Moses parting the Red Sea, and now Elijah fully inherits his identity. He is the new Moses. On the day he leaves the earth. And as they still went on and talked, behold, a chariot of fire, here's this pillar of fire again, and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen, and he saw him no more. So then Elijah ascends up into heaven in this pillar of fire that he's repeatedly called down to destroy his enemies. It is now the transit by which he ascends to heaven. There is something curious about this, and it's one of these issues that, again, we'll talk about in the third presentation of this series. It's quite remarkable that in the Old Testament, there is no mention of an afterlife until the late book of Daniel. And Daniel is written late, 3rd, 2nd century BCE. And the imagery in Daniel turns out to be probably descended from the Near East during the Babylonian captivity, where Daniel becomes an astrologer of the court of the Babylonians. In any case, there are only two real references to a heavenly world, or at least a world outside or beyond this one, in the Old Testament. And so many Christians just assume that that is, just standard fare. But for the most part, most biblical scholars believe that the ancient Israelites didn't believe in an afterlife, or maybe they believed in something like the ancient Near East, where everyone went to a dark, foreboding underworld. In any case, suddenly, out of nowhere, Elijah's going up into heaven, being taken up by God. And this implies then that there's a heaven, a heavenly space, and a place where the righteous can dwell. And this hasn't occurred before. The other two references to, this afterworld, there is a very early hint that something is going on with Enoch. But there's only a few verses in all of the Old Testament about the prophet Enoch. In Genesis 5:24, it says, he was no more, for God took him. And actually, nobody really knows what to do with that verse. So some say, well, that just means he dies. And other people say, no, like Elijah, that means he has been taken up from the earth. And it turns out all the Enoch tradition, and it's all late, unfortunately, but all of the Enoch tradition is about his ascent into heaven and his journey through the heavens. And so, in any case, that is a curious clue. And then in the book of Daniel, we are told that there is actually a judgment, and some will rise to glory and righteousness, and others will descend into eternal despair, and the wise shall be like the stars. So there's some interesting cosmology there. All right. This presentation is going to be a little long tonight. Now Elisha succeeds Elijah. Verse 14, then he took the mantle of Elijah. Now, Elijah's mantle is probably an animal skin cloak, probably a lamb skin or a ram skin, that signifies his prophetic office and ability. Then he took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water, saying, where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? And when he had struck the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha went over. Now when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho saw him over against them, they said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha. And they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. So now Elijah succeeds Elijah. He carries the mantle of Elijah, and he is able to part the waters of the river Jordan, just like Elijah, just like Moses. And so he is now the new prophet. And of course, this parallels the previous chapter where Ahaziah dies and his brother Jehoram succeeds him to the throne. And then the chapter ends with this really strange vignette that we're going to talk about in the next presentation. He went up from there to Bethel. So he returns to Bethel, the sacred precinct of the kingdom of Israel. And while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, go up, you bald head. Go up, you bald head. And he turned around, and when he saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. Well, again, we have this illusion of going up. Elijah just went up, and so these boys at Bethel are taunting Elisha, saying, you go up now, you go up. And this whole time, there has been this punning going on between people who belong up but fall down, people who are down low but are going up, down. And so, again, we get this pun right here. Go up, you bald head. And, of course, now Elijah, this is the only description we get of him. Is very rare to get such a description, but apparently he's a bald head as opposed to Elijah, who is a hairy man. So Elijah is sort of the opposite of Elijah. But then what's really interesting is Elisha's response. He curses them in the name of the Lord, and after he does that, 2 she-bears come out of the woods and kill 42 of the boys. Well, just for some clarity, the Hebrew word for the boys is katan na'er, and it really means, as I've listed it here, children, youths, boys, servants, retainers. All right, so like the King James Version, I think, translates katan na'er as children, but they range from the age of young teenagers, 12, 13, 14, to late 20s, right? So they're the servants or retainers of, it's, in the context of chapters 1 and 2, they're probably the servants and retainers of the sons of the prophets, who are the acolytes of the oracles at Bethel, right? The other interesting thing is the word she-bear is dov ya'er. So the boys are katan na'er and the bears are dov ya'er. So if you're listening to this orally, not reading it, the 2 words na'er, ya'er are homophonous. They sound alike. And so there is a contrast being made here between these alkalite boys and the bears that kill them. But then we're left with this image. Why does Elisha kill 42 children, youth, servants, retainers by 2 bears? Well, this is a motif that we will discuss in our next presentation when we go through the mythological religious background of chapter 2. Just as a final note, here is a recap of all the punning of the ups and downs that are going on in these 2 chapters. Ahaziah falls from the throne, from his throne down to a low place. He ascends to his bed. The bed, of course, is a low place. So these are, paradoxical puns. The 50 military men command Elijah to come down from his high place. Elijah goes down to a high place, and then Elijah descends down to the lowest inhabited city, Jericho, as he prepares to ascend to the highest place in the universe, the heavens. Elijah ascends into the heavens, and then finally this motif of Elijah taunted, go up, and 2 bears come down and kill the boys. And so what we're, I think, being introduced to is you never know what is up and down in the machinations of the way the world works. And so the Hebrew scribes are using this to show that Yahweh is the compass, right? And if you follow Yahweh, you'll know which way is up and down.